My name is Briley Smith, and my project topic is a comparison of the Romanesque style and the Gothic style. The Romanesque style began around 900 and started when a new line of rulers, the Ottonians, took control in Germany and revived the old traditions and founded new churches. They started a new style of architecture that we now call Romanesque. The word Romanesque comes from the word Roman. I'm sure that is no surprise, but it is because the Romanesque style came from the old Roman style. The Gothic style. In the late Middle Ages, the Crusades came in contact with the Islamic world, and this loosened the grip of feudalism. The European cities began to grow quickly and become wealthy. This is called the Gothic Awakening. Because of the Gothic Awakening, the towns and monasteries started building and renovating churches in North France and South England. This daring style we call Gothic started around 1150. The Romanesque style architecture is characterized by massive walls, rounded arches, barrel vaults, columns, and piers. The Romanesque architects were daring and found new ways to build. Unlike the past, they did not want a wooden roof, so they came up with a way to have a stone roof for their churches. This is when they developed vaulting. It is just simply taking the concept of a semicircle arch and stretching it to make it like a tunnel. The size of the buildings often made the churches the biggest buildings in the towns, and also made them the only competition to the Imperial Rome churches. The arches of the slides were geometrically logical. At the first glance of these beautiful churches, you can see the same geometrical designs repeated through the whole architecture of the church. These geometric designs include shapes such as squares and circles and designs like chevron. Though some of the Romanesque-style churches have been destroyed over time, some churches are still standing today. The buildings were supported by massive walls and columns. These columns were often not solid stone, but were hollow and filled with rubbish. As the building went up in height, the arches became smaller because they did not have to support the mass of the structure. This resulted in smaller columns. Though the size of the tops of these churches were smaller, they were still geometrically like the bottom. The outside of the church, much like the inside, were beautifully designed. The Gothic-style architecture is characterized most popularly by pointed arches, ribbed vaulting, flying buttresses, and stained glass windows. The Gothic architecture was made to have soaring lines to lift the eyes and to let light into the buildings. A large difference between the Romanesque style and the Gothic style architecture is the placement of the columns. In the Romanesque style architecture, the columns are on the inside of the structure. In the Gothic style architecture, the columns are on the outside of the structure. This allows flying buttresses to brace the weight of the roofs. Rib vaulting is similar to what it sounds like, a skeleton of stone that is filled with other masonry. Ribbed vaulting was present in the Romanesque-style architecture, but is more prevalent in the Gothic-style architecture. The combination of ribbed vaulting and flying buttresses is what supports the weight of the church, allowing the walls to have glass, not solid stone. The Third Abbey Church of Cluny in Burgundy, France, was the center of New Jerusalem and was the largest church building until the 16th century. With a central nave that peaked 98 feet above the floor, it was a grand church. The ribbed vaulting of the roofs not only helped support the weight of the massive church, but also served as some type of amplifier for the great choirs of the church. The abbey was led by abbots who were educated and orderly. This is part of the reason why it was so successful. The Notre Dame Cathedral was built on the ruins of two previous churches. The cathedral was very large, 420 foot long and 39 foot wide in the nave. Because of the size of the structure, it required a lot of support. More than a dozen piers were added to support the exterior walls and counteract the thrust of the nave. Flying buttresses were also added for extra support. Because of all this added support, the walls were able to have stained glass windows throughout the cathedral. Sadly, over the years, the Notre Dame Cathedral suffered a lot of damage and went through several restoration projects. The Abbey of St. Foy in Conques stood in the middle of the village. Although it wasn't the biggest of the Romanesque-style churches, it was still very important to the people of that era. The church held many sacred relics that people would come and see. Therefore, it was made to hold thousands of people. St. Foy had a barrel vault nave with an upper story gallery that let light into the church. The configuration of the church allowed it to serve many purposes at the same time. This is called the chevet. The Seville Cathedral is interesting because it was built over a large mass of time. Some say it was started in the 12th century and not finished until the 15th century. It is a very grand church with a 5-aisle interior that is 383 feet long, 249 foot wide, and 131 foot tall. Even with this large size, it is still beautifully symmetrical. The main chapel, Capilla Mayor, has a vaulted ceiling that soars 118 feet above the floor. This chapel holds a breathtaking wood sculpture altarpiece that is one of the largest in the world. It has 45 scenes from the life of Christ and the life of the Virgin Mary. It features gold that was brought back from the Americas during the expeditions of the New World led by Christopher Columbus. As you can tell by the name, the Romanesque style was greatly influenced by Rome, but their sculpture is what best displays this. Back in those days, the sculptures were made to educate the public of the stories from the religion. Gothic architecture and sculpture went hand in hand because sculpture was used to decorate the outside of the cathedrals. Oftentimes, in the earlier Gothic times, the figure sculptures would be of the royal family or a saint. I could understand this because most of the time they were used as decoration in the portals of the cathedral. As time went on, things began to change. The sculpture figures began to have more of a relaxed stance and expression, not as harsh or simple as the older Gothic style structures. The sculpture of the Last Judgment at the Cathedral of Saint Lazare in Audun, France is a sculpture that had a lot going on because it was made to show the events of the Last Judgment. Made around 1130, it is believed to have been sculpted by Gislebertus, but this is not for sure. It shows the beauty of the angels bringing humans up to heaven and demons dragging humans to hell. The attention to detail in the sculpture is beautiful. The demons were portrayed with no skin and bones exposed, and humans were portrayed as small, weak, and fragile figures. The sculpture of Adam and Isaac at the Chartres Cathedral is an example of a more advanced style of Gothic sculpture. The story of Abraham and Isaac is an example of obedience to God. God told Abraham he was to sacrifice his son, Isaac. Abraham listened to what God told him, but at the last minute, an angel appeared and told Abraham to sacrifice a lamb. This sculpture tells this story very clearly. It shows Abraham preparing for the sacrifice, raising his knife to slay Isaac, both Abraham and Isaac looking away, perhaps toward the angel that was talking to Abraham, and then Abraham sacrificing the lamb. This is another example of how the Middle Ages used sculpture to spread their religion. The Battle Majesty is a 12th century Romanesque wood carved sculpture. It symbolizes Christ on the cross and his victory over death. On the sculpture above his head is a Latin inscription that translates to Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. The polychromy, which is the painting on the sculpture, has been very well preserved over the last hundreds of years. The Battle Majesty is decorated with a blue floral design with red flames and embellished with dots. This sculpture has been very well preserved and is now in the National Art Museum of Catalonia in Barcelona. The first St. Calixtus at the Reims Cathedral is another example of the newer Gothic style of sculpture. It has full-length drapery, an individual face expression, and natural pose or stance. Although the Gothic style was influenced by the Romanesque style, the differences between them are clear, as you have seen throughout this comparison. It is important we maintain the integrity of these styles so we can appreciate and find inspiration from them in the future.